Hi, it's Mr. Height, ninth grade, Honors English, Perkins Valley School District. This is week 4 of the Week in Review. So here we go. Students, last Friday, because we had off last Thursday for the Jewish holiday. And so last Friday, students were engaged in the beginning of and working through the first few checkpoints in a writing training camp that I'm running with them. I may have talked a little bit about it last week. But basically, it's based on a packet here. Funny thing is, I started teaching back in 92 and 93. And in the summer of 92, I did some practicum work at a local high school, working with a summer school teacher there to sort of learn what it means to be a teacher. Because my degree's in English, I didn't have a teaching degree, but if I went through this summer practicum, I could get a certificate that would allow me to teach until I got my master's. So I taught with a teacher at Harriton High School on the main line in Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia. And what he did is he just gave students this packet, and it's from a book. I think the book is called The Lively Art of Writing. And students would work through the exercises in this book and read through the paragraphs in between that explained what was going on in terms of being a writer. And then students complete the checkpoints, turn them in, and then they immediately were getting feedback. Now, this was in summer school. I don't have the time to work that kind of a system with my ninth graders, but what I have done is I've gotten them to work through the first section of the packet, chapters 1 through 4. They started that last Friday, and they completed it on Tuesday of this week. And so they've completed checkpoints 1 through 4. Then I had them do peer revisions. So we're using a portfolio system, online portfolio system called Seesaw, which allows them to access each other's documents real easily, keeps everything in neat folders for the students, and then they can access the Google Doc, comment back to each other about the quality of the writing that they're seeing in each of these exercises. And since they've all done the same exercises, they all know generally what to look for. But I did give them models from when I taught this back in the 90s, and I gave them some key checkpoints, key things to look for, aspects to provide feedback on. So that was our first round through this. Students have their revisions due on this next Tuesday, and then I'll get a chance to see what their writing looks like and how they revised. So that gives me a chance to understand my writers and how they're thinking in writerly ways, which is really my goal, to get my students not necessarily to think of themselves as writers, because I think that's something that we all would hope, but I can certainly get them to create or establish a mindset of a writer, so we'll call that to think in writerly ways. So that was Monday through Tuesday, really. Yesterday, they did their peer review and commented on each other's documents, and today they got those comments back. They got to look at them and work through revisions. So yeah, that's where we are with that. Monday and Tuesday, however, were cafe days, and so we always start our cafe days off with poems. And on Monday, I introduced students to a poem by Howard Nemerov, and that poem is called The Makers, and it reads like this. Who can remember back to the first poets, the greatest ones, greater even than Orpheus? No one has remembered that far back, or now considers among the artifacts and bones and cantilevered inference the past is made of. Those first and greatest poets, so lofty and disdainful of renown, they left us not a name to know them by. So there's a few more stanzas there, but the really cool thing about this poem is that he's asking a question that I think a lot of people have asked, right? Which is like, who were the first people to say certain words? He even has a line in the next stanza. They were the first that in whatever tongue worded the world. They were the first to say star, water, stone, that said the visibles and made it bring invisibles to view in wind and time and change, and in the mind itself. He goes on from there. It's a great meditation on who were these people, and how did we get these words, and what was it like before the words were there. He calls that the hitherto idiot world. That before we had the words for things, right? So it really gets them to think about something that maybe some of them actually have thought about. I asked, and a number of them raised their hands and said, yeah, I wondered who called this thing a stool, let's say. Okay, so that was Monday. And then Tuesday, we had another poem, and that poem is also by Howard Nemerov, and that poem is called Writing. So what we did is we went from a poem about speaking the world into existence to the physical act of writing, or the more mechanical act, I guess I would say, of writing. And that poem starts, "The cursive crawl. The squared off characters, these by themselves delight, even without a meaning. In a foreign language, in Chinese, for instance." And then he goes on from there to talk about the mechanical, physical act of writing and how marvelous he believes that is. So that's where we are for this week in 9th grade honors English. We're going to be moving next week to applying some of the things that we learned from our writing training camp, putting them to work in a reflective essay based upon the famous radio essays that were started by, I believe, Edward R. Murrow, and the series was called This I Believe, and it was revived by National Public Radio in the mid 2000s. Still exists somewhat, but I'm going to have my students work through This I Believe essays, so you'll get a chance to hear some of those next week and in the weeks following. Till then, that's the week in review.